Good afternoon and welcome to the Global Business Leaders Forum. Today's topic is CEOs and the media make it a love affair. Our guest today is Kevin Daum. My name is Julie Poland. I'm a coach, part of the Gravitas Impact team of coaches globally. Welcome, Kevin, to our webinar this afternoon on CEOs and the media. It's great to talk with you today. So for some background for those of you who don't already know, Kevin is an Inc. 500 winner. He's a college professor. He's an author of a best-selling book, Roar, corporate coach, media expert, and I also had the opportunity to find out that he really likes to fish. And if I recall correctly, you discovered the power bait is awesome for getting bass. Is that correct, Kevin?
Power bait worms. Yeah, we've been living on a lake
power
for
bait
last year, and at this time of the year, the power bait worms seem to be what pulls them out of the weeds in the heat.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What I'd like to do is just kind of start with an overview, Kevin, of what you've been all about. How CEOs need to be masters of multiple forms of media in today's environment, specifically text, audio, visual, and live. Could you talk about why this overall is important and how this is going to have a huge impact on their performance overall?
Well, I think what many CEOs and certainly the ones from my generation, we got comfortable in a place where we had a few channels in which to communicate to our audience, and our audience, whether it's our customers, whether it's our shareholders, or probably the most important audience, quite honestly, our internal audience, our employees. And look, a lot of the work that Gravitas does, a lot of the coaching work that I've done is about building amazing organizations. People love to talk about core values. Thank you, Jim Collins. They talk about aligning the organization, which today is even harder because we're doing it through this stuff. And yet at the same time, there's a massive amount of noise. The reality is that it is super, super easy in today's environment to create content. In fact, this thing here, and those of you who recognize the three lenses on the back of that will know this to be an Apple iPhone 11 Pro. This machine is so capable of creating multimedia content that the professionals in the industry, the TV industry, are now using it to produce. And if you don't think that's true, anybody who's watched American Idol this year in a post-COVID environment now knows that their entire latter part of the season was done on this particular unit. And that includes the production of that media, that includes the transmission of that media, the editing and the distribution through that process. So everybody, or large amounts of people, I should say, hold a complete professional, media-capable production facility in their hand for about $1,000. And many of them use it. And so that's why you see all of this amazing content. And quite honestly, the amazing content is probably a small amount of it. And then you see all this mediocre, and God forbid, please don't make me have to consume that content all over the internet. And if you're not actually producing compelling professional content for your audiences, those three audiences that we talked about, then I guarantee you they are getting information from somebody who is. And often that information is going to be completely inconsistent with the message that you're trying to get. Now, in an external basis, you're going to recognize that just simply by the fact that you might not be getting the customers that you want. You might not be getting as many of them as you want, or they might not be the right customers, or they may not be willing to pay you a premium price. In your internal environment, this is all of the reason why your people can't state your core values, don't live by them. You have to tell them 500 times what to do. They don't seem to coalesce around what the things are that you believe as a CEO should actually be done. They don't understand what you're thinking. I like to talk about when you create media, you look for what irks you, what's inconsistent in your communication, what's redundant in your communication, what's confusing in your communication, and you assess that not by what you're pushing out, but you assess that by the behavior of the people that you're communicating to. And the challenge is that this has all come in such a short amount of time. I mean, the iPhone, the smartphone really didn't come into play until a little over a decade ago, and now it's moved so fast, but that didn't stop the consumers from consuming it in that way. So if you're a CEO and you're not ahead of the game in how to produce this content in super compelling ways, and even at a very minimal, at a professional quality way, then your people are, it's worse than turning you off. They're just not going to pay attention at all. And then you're going to sit there and wonder why you're not making the strides in alignment and progress that you're hoping to. And just to give you one factor to see how unbelievably intimidating this can be, Michaela, if you wouldn't mind putting up the slide that I brought. So this is a basic breakdown, almost outdated now, of the media formatics in text, audio, visual, and live that are completely available to you on a machine that's as simple as that phone, that are available for inexpensively, relatively easy to produce mechanically and to distribute. The problem is that very few people are good at even one or two. There are hardly anybody who understands how all of these integrate together. And by the way, they're not the same. How you would do a column for an online column or blog post, and I've written over 1,000 columns for Inc. So we've seen what the success has worked and not worked there, versus how you would do a podcast, versus how you would do a short form video, versus how you do a long form training video, versus how you would create graphic elements that would actually be taught for learning. All of these have specific requirements and specific expertise that makes the difference between whether somebody will consume it and, more importantly, whether somebody will share it, and how that absorption works. And there just aren't very many people that are teaching this. Part of that reason is because over the last several decades, we have pushed heavily in our educational communities. We've pushed STEM and taken people away from humanities. And so we haven't funded the people that we need who actually are smart and understanding in how to communicate in these areas. Most of those people end up going into the entertainment industry or the agency industry. Very few of them wake up and say, I can't wait to start my career in corporate communications. So there's a riff for you.
Kevin, I'm curious, you're talking about how a lot of people are just awful at doing it, and there's content everywhere. A lot of the content isn't very good. So understanding what you said earlier about how you can gauge whether you're good or not based on whether you're getting the response that you're looking for, whether it's clients externally or whether it's employees internally, is it better to put out no content if it's not working, or bad content and learn how to make it better content?
Well, I think it depends on the importance of the content. So if you're a company and you need to put out HR policies, it's probably better to put out content in an uninteresting format than to not put it out at all. But the irony is that it doesn't require, once you've designed a process for how you're going to communicate with your people in an engaging and entertaining manner, it doesn't really take any more work or any more effort to continue to do that in that way. It's the setup time. Like everything else. I mean, this is the problem that CEOs have as a whole. It's the reason why, quite honestly, companies don't even want to engage with a gravitas coach. It's not about the money. It's not about the philosophy. Ultimately, it's about the time. When I walk into a CEO's office and I say, hey, you should really be doing this, and they read compelling material about how to organize and align their company, or how to put media in place, and we say to them, you should be, we take Michael Gerber's approach and say, you should be spending 20% of your time on the business rather than in the business. This is the 20% of the time. This is some of where it should be going to your communication system. The challenge is when I say to an employer, when they're doing their strategic planning, and I say, look, when we say you should be spending 20% of your time, here's what we actually mean. If that department requires 5 people in order to do the operational aspects of what it is that you need in your company, you should hire 6, so that each of those people has time to commit to whether they're working on alignment issues, personal development issues, communication issues, and then you should facilitate systems and processes so that they can do that. Now, what happens when you get back into the company? Well, they sit there and they go, well, who's going to do that? We don't have anybody. I don't know how to find them. And oh, by the way, you want me to spend 20% of my time. I'm already spending 125% of my time just trying to keep my customers in shape. And so that's where the breakdown happens. And so there does require advanced design work. There requires commitment. There requires some managing of your impatience, something a lot of CEOs, particularly entrepreneurial ones, aren't known for, where they have to say, look, I'm going to commit the time over a couple of years to do this. I'm going to find people who actually understand. And by the way, you can't find someone or I should say, it's very difficult to find someone who has an understanding of business education, business knowledge, business development that is also skilled in media. That's part of the challenge in the environment. Teaching at Fordham in New York City, I can tell you that in their HR classes, they don't teach media communications. And in the media classes, with the exception of me, they don't teach internal communication as it relates. And so this, and really because this is relatively new, it's far faster than Columbia University can go out and do a 5-year study and then figure out how everybody is working along the way. And COVID now is an accelerator. So because we had seen for the last 7 years a lot of resistance to the use of media, people in the executive area that were predominantly baby boomers, Gen X, some millennials coming in right now, they wanted to do things the old-fashioned way, face-to-face, phone calls. And so this is why the video chat didn't necessarily go anywhere. It was just starting to gain some traction. Now COVID comes in, and now people have, as they tend to, they've taken on Zoom as the only way to communicate, which, by the way, Zoom is not the only way to communicate, nor is it even the best way to communicate for a lot of conversation. But that's the problem. People are so messed up in the way that they're trying to approach things. They want simplification. So they sit there and they look at something like Zoom and they say, well, Zoom is the thing now, so I'm going to do every call on Zoom, rather than taking the time to say, is this Zoom call actually going to be the best functionality for what I'm trying to accomplish with this particular person, or would I be better off by phone and not having that video face-to-face? And that requires decision-making. And if there's one thing I know most CEOs do not want to add to their list of to-dos, it's making more decisions. And yet that's what it requires. It requires the understanding and the ability to disseminate what is the right material to use and where. Now, they should not do all that themselves. They should hire people, find people, put people inside who can build those skill sets and figure it out. And then they need to be able to set an environment of real honest critique. Because in the dynamic of the office environment, what happens is people don't want to, they tread lightly on what they will say about colleagues who venture into something creative and or unusual. And so when somebody comes out and they do this video and they go, oh my God, that video is really nice. And that's part of the problem is, if you ask them the right question is, would you actually watch the whole of that video, or would you share it, which is really what you care about? And then they kind of go, well, they hem and haw, because somebody put their heart and soul into that. It's their baby, and nobody wants to tell somebody else it's their ugly baby, particularly if they work in the cubicle next door. And so this is what.
So this isn't.
Sorry,
I'm sorry. So this is not just about adding a corporate communications department. This is about having your entire organization being more media savvy. If what you're talking about is having a group that's willing to give honest critique, they kind of need to know what they're talking about, I would think. Now they can look at it as a consumer standpoint. How do you bring the knowledge base up so that your organization can do that sort of thing?
Yeah, the consumers will simply vote with their dollars, and the challenge in that particular space is we mostly look at the customers that we have and very rarely look at the customers that we want that we're not getting, which is really where the data is. You know, often I'll go in with ROAR, which is about compelling value propositions, and we'll and the first thing we'll do is we'll say, well, let's figure out what your customers really want, and they all want to go talk to their existing customers with their customer satisfaction. And the problem is that all your existing customers are the ones who already believe you're bull. So the people that you're really interested in are the people who aren't buying you, that you know are viable candidates for your business. And for the early entrepreneurs, it should be clear that's not everybody, because they like to think it's everybody. It's not everybody. But on the internal side, the skew there is that there is a lack of honesty generally out of your internal people, because they have something to lose: their job, their income, their peace of mind in working with the people that they love. And what we don't do in corporate America, even in the SMB world, is set up lines in general of steady critique. So Julie, you and I had some pre-conversation. We both come from the theater world. And for those who have never been involved in theatrical performance, here's what actually happens in that environment. If you were to go to NYU Tisch or UCLA Theater School, or even Humboldt State University in Northern California, where I went, the process is you create a concept, you recruit skilled labor around that concept, and then you align those people around that idea and ultimately finish that project on time and on budget. In the process of that, after you've done your work on that particular aspect of the theater production, at the end of that evening, you spend, could be an hour or 2.5 hours, going through all the things that you did wrong, day after day after day. And in fact, the people who sit there in that production, they crave that information to understand what they're not doing as well as they could possibly be. Because, by the way, their number one priority is their audience, their customer. And so they put their ego aside, they put their feelings aside in order to deliver what's necessary at that place. And for those of you who have worked with actors and directors, you know there's no shortage of ego there, right? But they put that aside because ultimately the audience is the thing. In the case of companies, it would be your customers, both internal and external. The problem, or the thing that they do then, is they go through this critique and critique and critique, and it is ingrained into you that is the thing that you want the most. That your people are not actually helping you unless they are actually being forthright and honest and constructive at every single moment, regardless of how they feel, because they put the customer first. And by the way, all the companies that sit there and say, oh, we put the customer first, we put the customer first. I've seen that garbage core value out there 1,000 times about putting the customer first. What they don't actually do that. Many of those companies put the customer first when the customer has a problem. They don't actually invest the time in systems, communication, process, and that will actually put the customer first so that they don't have a problem in a proactive manner. And so that's where the breakdown occurs. Now, all those people that work in theater, when they get all done with all that critique, at the end of the production, when it doesn't seem to matter anymore, they do what's called a post-mortem, and they sit down and they critique the heck out of that thing to figure out how to make it better. This is what we teach in the arts, and I guarantee you we don't teach it in business school. I saw it through my own experience in business school and my own experience teaching. We will just teach people how to be nice, when what we should be doing is teach them how to be kind. Because the nice is just a way of letting them head off the cliff and bring mediocrity to the table. And then the CEOs complain that their employees aren't valuable and they're not getting where they need to go to.
Fascinating stuff. I'm wondering, as you look at all these different ways to communicate, these modes of text, audio, visual, and live, is there one that's more important right now in this place where we are? I know you talked about Zoom, and everybody thinks they see a nail because this is the hammer du jour for communication.
Yeah.
Is there one that if you're going to be good at it, you better be good at this one?
Well, so many people love for those of you who remember City Slickers, they love the Jack Palance line about, the one thing. And when people ask me, and I've had this question for years since I wrote Video Marketing for Dummies and we did Roar and I write the columns, and people will say, Kevin, what's the one thing? What's the one thing I need to know to make this a success? The one thing that you need to know to make it a success is that there is no one thing. Your audience picks up media, consumes information in multiple ways. So the one thing you need to know how to do is identify 4 or 5 of these that you can become proficient at, and design a system in your company where you can efficiently take a piece of content and drive it down those channels and make those channels so compelling that people want to tune in and tune in and tune in. By the way, this is not a new concept. We have these things called radio and TV that actually do that. We make it so engaging that you come to it all the time because it's compelling and it's entertaining. And for that, we get the privilege of giving you the message that we want to give you. But if we don't make it entertaining and compelling, we don't get that privilege. It's called ratings, and people will just go away, and ultimately the programming will go away. The challenge in the working space is that many CEOs believe, and executives as a whole, think that what they have to say is so important that people will just listen to it or watch it or read it anyway. They won't. There are different levels of absorption and attention capital for what it takes to get those people to required to be engaged at that level. And you have to control that situation. You have to look at how to up those numbers in the best way and then build the efficient communication programs behind it. And all of this, I'm sure, is going to sound overwhelming and way too hard. And they will look at that and say, that's a really nice to have. I won't have time. All I would ask in those circumstances is the next time you're counseling an employee or you're sitting there and you're having a WTF moment about what happened with that employee, think for just a moment how this might be the very reason that would have solved that, even if it was just to be able to communicate to your recruiting department, if you have one, how to get the right person in the door and the right person in the right seat. So the thing that I learned when I built my Inc. 500 company, what I could do from my own capability was better than a lot of people. And that's the thing about entrepreneurs. The EO community, which I was part of for 12 years, the ability to build $1 million business, most of those people, not all, but most of those people, they are particularly good at building a business. And they are what Collins calls a genius with 1,000 helpers. And they can shoot from the hip and do a lot of good. I've interviewed over 500 YPOers. I've written about them. They're on my podcasts. What I've learned at that next level, at that over 100 employees, is that you have to create systems and processes to be able to manage all the elements, the components, the required components of being able to grow that company. If you don't, you will stall. You'll stall at 50, 60 employees, and you just won't be able to grow to that place that you want to grow to. And to do systems and processes requires commitment. I can tell you from the marketing side, any really effective marketing program, particularly with effective differentiation and positioning, takes 3 years to create, no matter how good you are on it. The first to design it, the second to refine it, and the third to implement it. And this is a marketing program. This is an internal marketing program or an external marketing program using the available tools that are unbelievable, that never were available to you 15 years ago. Didn't exist. Certainly wasn't affordable. If you go back even 20 years, the cost of producing a video would have been $25,000, $30,000. And you would have had to hire professionals who knew how to use Avid systems and all of that. Now it can simply be done by most of your 12-year-olds with an iPhone and iMovie. Pretty amazing.
Fascinating. When you were talking earlier about like a radio station, you're playing it and playing it and playing it. One of the things that I had seen with CEOs is that they felt like they had already communicated because they've talked about certain topics in their executive meetings, maybe in a managerial meeting down one level. And so they thought that they've been doing repetition. It's just that the number of people that have actually heard the repetition is fairly small. Has that been your experience as well?
Yeah, many CEOs believe that they only have to say things once. But coming from the marketing and advertising environment, I know that you have to say things at least 20 times. If the person that you're communicating to doesn't have some sort of emotional relationship with what it is that you're saying, it will not be filed, and they won't remember it a year down the line, or maybe even a month down the line. So you might put out a piece of policy that relates to 20% of your people. The other 80%, it's not relevant to them in that moment, and they don't necessarily know where to go to be able to get that information down the line, and you haven't made any sort of emotional connection. And this is why a lot of the work that I do these days is about teaching storytelling. And I don't mean the garbage about storytelling that the branding people have been talking about telling your own story and all of this. I actually mean functional storytelling. I do a lot of work around teaching 10th grade English to executives. It's funny how few of us remember, if you weren't connected to the humanities in some way, how a story actually goes together, what the design around it is, why it's impactful and successful. But as I walk through this piece quickly, if you think about why you watch episodic TV or read fiction, you'll recognize this basic structure that gets done. You start with exposition, which is the establishing the where and the who, the protagonist. You put them into conflict. That conflict, and some people will remember this as theme, is usually human versus human, human versus the environment, or human versus themselves. And you build them up to this incredible emotion. For those of you who have Disney Plus, you can see what happens just by watching any Marvel movie in this, or any episode of The Mandalorian, and it's all very formulaic. And the whole idea is to get you to relate to that protagonist and to build up how you feel about that protagonist in a relative way, so that your body actually exhibits physical change, nervousness, tingling, excitement, and you pepper it in with other entertainment aspects, humor, trauma, beauty, to ultimately get you to the point where you're just like, oh my God, I just so know what wants to happen. You got to give me some sort of release. And we call that, of course, the climax of the story. And that physical release of the climax of the story, when that happens, it's not a coincidence that there's a connection with that with sex. The fact is that physical climax and release is something that records in the brain and the body if there's message attached to it. And that is how you get these things to happen. Now, there's a lot involved in that. You have to talk about someone that people can relate to. When I do these storytelling sessions with CEOs, the first thing that the CEOs want to do is and they do this in their own companies. They like to tell stories about this amazing thing that happened. The stories all sound the same. We had a customer, the customer had a tragic issue, we stepped in and we solved the problem, and the customer was happy ever after. And these are most of the stories that we tell, and I call it the tragic hero situation. And here's what we're teaching our employees when we tell these stories. We're saying, okay, wait for some drama to occur with your customers, and then when the drama occurs, go above and beyond and do something that's outside of our systems and processes in order to make that customer happy and make that happen. And what we don't do is spend time talking about the mundane things that we wish we'd changed. First of all, we start with the CEO. Well, here's the news to the CEO, which is, to most of your employees, with very few exceptions, you are a freak. You are someone that they cannot relate to. They may admire you, they may like you, they may want to emulate you, but they don't see themselves as a CEO. And so when they see you, we're an entrepreneur. So when they see you do those things or you tell them stories about what you did, mostly what they'll do is dismiss and they won't be emotionally connected to it. They'll just sit there and go, I could never be that woman or that guy. But when we tell stories about people in the company at the lowest level, at the starting level, that did extraordinary things, and not extraordinary things in a moment of crisis, but actually took on something that was extraordinary in a moment of mundane boredom. The person who sat there and had nothing special going on, but found it worth their while because they wanted to do something for the company, that they found some budget item that was just being wasted, that they went and figured out a new way to get customers, that they actually figured out how to do their job better and shared it with the world. Those are the stories that don't get told. Those are the core values stories that we don't even take the time to identify and replicate and teach our people how to tell them over and over and over again. And it's not that hard. It's not that hard. We do have to take our people and teach them those mechanics, which by the way, at least in the US, they learned in 10th grade anyway. Give them not only permission, but requirement to use them. Give them some training and peer groups that will give them effective technique to say, you know, the way you present that isn't really compelling. Let me actually tell you what would work for me. To give them that open environment. And then to catalog them and have somebody who understands some aspect of media to put them into some sort of engaging transmission that the new people want to listen to all the way down the line. And by the way, if you're a growth company, there's the reason why saying at one time doesn't do any good. If you're adding 10 employees a month and you've got an attrition rate of let's say 3% a month, then what happens is you have a bunch of new people coming in all the time, and you have to say it over and over again and reinforce it.
We were talking a moment ago about the core values stories, and it's easier to identify those core values stories in a moment of customer trauma, where somebody's leaping tall buildings in a single bound to solve a problem. Yeah. How does one go about uncovering those silent victories that are happening all the time that would make wonderful stories, but these are the people that are the unsung heroes in the organization that deserve to get some light shown on them?
Yeah, there's a couple of components that are problematic to begin with. So for example, a lot of core values aren't really core values, they're really table stakes. We see these things called, the one that I think is the biggest offender is integrity, right? So the second you see integrity, I'm going to offend a lot of CEOs right now and possibly some coaches, and that's fine. I'm from New York, so it kind of goes with the territory. For those of you who have integrity as a core value in that way, it just demonstrates that you haven't really put thought into your core value. Because here's what you're saying. If you read Collins in its purest form, right, go to Built to Last or go to the original Jerry Porras, it's amazing how many people don't even know that that's where core values were actually identified and who Jim Collins is. But in this group, I would expect they do. What they say is that the core value is under which you make a decision. So it's not a table stake where this should just be a natural thing for you. I can tell you that for myself, for any employee that I've ever had, if you have to make a decision about integrity, first of all, you have to define what integrity means, and integrity means lots of things to lots of different people. If you don't believe that, then you should talk to lawyers, because they have varying levels of integrity in the way that they do, and none of them believe that they're not few of them believe that they're not integrous. So the issues of don't steal, don't lie, don't cheat, even when you get to the don't lie, which is how many companies sit there and say, well, you need to have integrity. By the way, always make the customer feel good. And how often will you have to tell a white lie in order? Because I guarantee you, there's very few companies that are customer focused that will have truth, one of my personal core values, actually as a core value, because they don't want to tell the customer the truth all the time. And it's not that they want to lie to them, but hey, if it's a minor issue and there was a slip up and the delay happened and it didn't really affect the comfortability of the customer, you're not likely to go out there and tell the truth along that way. So the whole point is that these core values, they have to mean something. So when you have something like integrity, the fact is that if you hired somebody and they steal from you, it wasn't that they weren't paying attention to the core value, it's that they were a bad hire to begin with. So you have to go beyond this table stakes. People who are kind, people who are, who don't lie, cheat, and steal without a legitimate reason that makes sense. So when you find a core value that gives you a decision to make, that core value now needs a story that works with it. So at the turn of the century, I like to say that, I had a company in the Daum era. We raised a couple $1 million. We were heading down the path of building the company with investor money. And we had a core value, and the core value was get over it. And my father hated me forever for that core value. He's like, that's terrible. Why would you have a core value that says get over it? Don't you care about your people? And I said, well, it's really interesting because right now I've got investor money. We're in a very hot-bedded market, and we believe that this company has to move forward regardless. So the attitude is not that we don't care about the people, it's that we want people where if they're given the choice of the task at hand or how I feel, we want them to choose the task at hand. And so we would get people in, and this is the beauty of core values. People would come into the interview and they would walk through our core values and they would say, oh, get over it. What does that mean? Well, when you're faced with the task at hand or how I feel, we want you to choose the task at hand. And they would say, that's awful. You don't care how I feel. And I would go, well, it's not that we don't care how you feel. It's that we don't want it to be the priority as you come into the work environment. And they would say, well, I couldn't work in that way. And we go, thank you very much. Thank you for helping us understand that you would not fit in this culture. And at the same time, we would get somebody who would come in and they would sit there and they would say, what is this again? Yeah, get over it. What does that mean? Well, it means you have a choice of the task at hand or how I feel, and we want you to choose the task at hand. This is amazing. If I have to listen to one more of my colleagues complaining about why they don't want to do something, why they can't get something done, I will go crazy. This is the company that I want to work at. That's what a true core value does. And that's how easy it is to tell stories around it. Because now you can exemplify people in the company who came up against a situation where they should have been able to express how they felt if they were in a company that had that dynamic and they chose the task at hand. It doesn't have to be the CEO who is, quote, perfect all the time anyway. That's where the core values break down. And the more stories of reinforcement that you can have on that, that can happen with an employee that came in day one, which then empowers all the new employees to go, oh my God, this person emulated the core value on day one. I can do that. I'm empowered. Did I answer your question?
Fascinating. Yes, that's great. Thank you. I'd like to talk a little bit about externally facing communication. And this first question relates to inside or outside, but I'm thinking of it right now in terms of outside. How you were talking earlier about how it's a 3-year process to develop your message and to get your message out there. And I've been in a number of environments where people joked about the flavor of the month. How does an organization sustain consistency in their messaging over a rapidly changing environment, COVID or no COVID?
Yeah, I think that the challenge for a lot of companies is that the reason why they change so often is because they haven't gotten it right to begin with. So for example, if in ROAR, I talk about differentiation. So here's what true differentiation is. Something that your competitors can't do or won't do without great effort or expense. Something that your competitors can't do or won't do without great effort or expense. So if you come up with something and we say, well, what are your differentiators? We go through this process and they'll go, oh, customer service. Really? I was in the mortgage business for 30 years. I can tell you that I would go up against a B of A. I don't have a problem telling you, and now, we can even document it, that B of A and Wells Fargo probably have the reputations for the worst customer service ever. Wells Fargo to the point of illegal activity, right? Because they've now lost on that. I don't think there's a single piece of marketing material from B of A or from Wells Fargo that will tell you that their customer service is awful or illegal. That's not a differentiator. So if you're out there saying our differentiator is experience, our differentiator is customer service, those aren't differentiators, and that's why they're not taking root, and that's why you're having to change all the time, because it's just noise, it's falling on deaf ears, and it's not making a difference. If you're competitive, if what you say instead is quantifiable, right? So if your customer service issue is, hey, we respond to you within 30 minutes and your industry standard is an hour and a half or a day, that's a measurable differentiator that you have to build processes and systems to be able to do that and meet that brand promise. And so, but at that point, that's measurable, that's a differentiator. It demonstrates customer experience in a way that nobody else does. There's a customer that we worked with that actually had that talked about extraordinary service in their industry, and they said, no, we have to be able to communicate that. And I said, fine, put together a list of 10 things that you do that your competitors do not, so that when you say that you provide a better customer experience than they do, they can look at those 10 things and they can identify them, and they're tangible and they're quantifiable in a way that makes a difference. But again, this requires work. And it doesn't require work when you're, a 20-person company where you've got a good market share that's relationship built. It does require work when you're trying to actually build a market share, a percentage market share, against people who don't know you, who don't know your product, in an environment where you're going to have to steal customers. And by the way, almost all customers are stolen. Unless you're in an environment where you're actually creating new customers to a particular product, if you're on any sort of service and or repetitive environment, you're going to be taking that customer away from somebody else, who, by the way, tells them that they have experience and good customer service, and they don't know it unless they don't. And you're either going to be taking it away from them, or you're going to be taking it away from whatever it is that they do that they haven't felt they've needed you before. So you have to figure out, how are you extraordinary in that particular arena? And as has been said by many people smarter than me, price is a race to the bottom.
Sure. So at the risk of stating the obvious, good messaging is no substitute for good substance.
Well, it's funny.
I mean, really.
That's absolutely true. I was on a panel at one point with a number of high-level entrepreneurs, and it was one of these entrepreneurship meetings, and they said, and the question was, what's the one thing that makes you successful? And somebody said, well, you got to work really hard. You have to have passion. You have to believe in your product. And it came to me, and I said, well, I've seen lots of people who work really hard, believed in their product, and had tons of passion and failed miserably. And they're like, well, what is it that you need? And I said, an absolute great effing business model. If you don't have an unbelievable business model in that way, by the way, you have no idea how hard it was for a New Yorker to not, to say effing. So I just, but I managed. But the point is that if you don't get your strategy right, if you don't actually understand what will take in the marketplace, then the rest of it's just noise. And you go back to building the business on relationships, which is fine. And that's why we all like to sit there and go, well, what I really need is a really great salesperson. What many mean by that is, I need somebody who has a really big contact list that people will just follow them into the business. And that's a model too. You can go in and buy those people if that's the way. You won't sustain them if you don't have a business model that will help them be successful and you don't have the communication tools that are there. And by the way, in retention of amazing business people who are good at building relationships, this again goes back to this media formatics basis. They need tools. This is what marketing is all about, is the efficiency tools. In other words, instead of taking all the mundane things of the questions, again, those questions, the IRC, what's inconsistent, what's redundant, what's confusing. If your customers are asking those questions and your salespeople are having difficulty communicating it, well, imagine if you had media, whether it's blog posts or podcasts or short video or short audio, to just give that to the customer, where it's so compelling that you give them one and they go, oh my God, I want to listen to 20 of them, or your salespeople can shoot them out at a moment's notice and direct them to that. That's where the efficiency comes from. These are all about efficiency tools. These are what will actually give you back the time, but nothing gives you time without investing the time in the beginning. And this is where the challenge is for the CEOs. COVID has given most companies, actually, not all, but most, a time dividend. All that time that you don't have to commute, all that time that you're not bantering about the office. Yes, it makes some things difficult, but people have time and they're interested in doing something other than reading the news about what the number count is. And so all they need is the
There's a question. I'm sorry, Kevin. Go.
No, sorry. They need the computer that they have, or the tool that they already have, and the encouragement and or the requirement from those companies to get skilled at that information. And where do you find that? Exactly where they're going with this. And that can be incentivized in a myriad of ways. I guarantee you, anybody that has 50 plus employees in their company, they have writers in there. They have people who love to play with video in there. They have people who love to play with audio in there that would just die for a creative opportunity. And in their town, there are a ton of creative people coming out of the media schools and the theater schools that right now are stuck at home, can't even go to school, that would love an opportunity and work for relatively little money to be able to learn how to create a job for themselves for the next several years. But this requires some out-of-the-box thinking. But if we're not going to do out-of-box thinking in this particular environment, well, then, you know, we're just not going to do it, because it's not going to get better for the next 3 years, that's for sure.
Kevin, a question came in. I'd love for you to answer. Whether business got their message right or not, how do they maintain the integrity of their message as external factors change around them? For instance, a business could have a perfect message that differentiates, connects, meets needs, answers questions, but it might very quickly become irrelevant as the world around them changes. How do they maintain or leverage in that kind of a situation?
Well, certainly there are cataclysmic events, like if you're in the live, let's say you're in the live trade show business right now, or you're in the airline business, travel business, you know, at that point, your business model may simply disintegrate, and no messaging in the world is going to help that. In 2008, I was in the mortgage industry after 30 years, and the investors that I had literally went away. There was no business model that was going to save where I was at that time. And so you have to take stock. And unfortunately, that just happens. If the core of your company and what it provides is still a viable business and a viable environment, you might have to revise how you deliver to those customers. You might have to revise who is your core customer. But again, the trick is not to go and fix the messaging. The trick is to go back, or the need is to go back and look at your business strategy and figure out what is the business model and what's likely to come. Now, the challenge that we've seen in COVID, I think, is that way too many people have been optimistic about where things are going. There's been plenty that have been pessimistic. But again, to reference Collins, I'm a big subscriber to the Stockdale paradox, which is not to be optimistic nor pessimistic, but to actually look and say, I have unending faith that the economy will come back. However, we have to confront the brutal facts. We don't actually know the capability. We don't actually know what will happen. Everybody likes to talk about a vaccine now. The reality is the logistical nightmare of getting the vaccine to hundreds of millions of people within a short period of time frame is just, it's insane. It just isn't likely going to happen. And it doesn't take into account the 30% of the people that won't take the vaccine anyway. So we're dealing in an area of uncertainty. In an area of uncertainty, you have to figure out what can you be certain about and then design your business around that, giving yourself the flexibility to be able to expand upon that. The reality is I'm advising clients right now not to spend a lot of time working on messaging because we are in for the only thing that is certain is that we will be in uncertain times probably through the first quarter of 2021. No matter how you feel about politics, if the Trump administration renews and they're there, the truth is nobody really does know what they'll do or what approach they'll take, and they won't really get around to doing anything until after the holidays that will have the impact on that basis. If they follow the current chart, they are limited to what actually happens with vaccines, which won't actually take place until the middle of next year. If the Biden administration actually gets in, you'll have a lame duck period that nobody knows what will happen because this particular administration hasn't done anything the same way that any other transfer has. So we don't know what will occur in that period of time. And they won't actually take office until January 20th, and therefore you won't actually see any policy changes that can be impacted for at least 60 days, and that takes you through to March. So however you look at it, doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on, we are uncertain until Q2 of 2021. So if you're in the process of just trying to message to try and, you can only deal with the chaos. And so you have to look at your business model and say, how does your business model function in that chaos over the next 6 months? And then adjust your messaging to work where you think you can extract the dollars in that short period of time. And then go to work on where you think it's going to be at the end of the day. Is everybody going to still be at home 3 years from now? Probably not. Is everybody not going to be traveling 3 years from now? Probably not. So you got a 3-year gift to work on what do you see the business as 3 years from now, and then determine how are you going to fund that process along the way, retain the people that you absolutely need. And I can't stress enough, this is the time to trim the fat as best as you can. Everything that's a nice to have in your company needs to go away. Everything that you need to have, like strategy, like putting systems and processes in place so that you're efficient, those are the things that you have to have.
Kevin, you referenced current events and with the election upcoming and all that sort of thing. Another thing from a communication perspective, I just want to let you know we have like about 5 more minutes to invest before we close things out. But currently with some of the upheaval that's going on in the country, Black Lives Matter, all the various demonstrations in cities, there have been a number of companies who've felt compelled to come forward with some messaging about all that. And, you know, one company in particular I can think of, people internal to the company were frustrated that the company didn't have something that was out there. And then other companies I've heard, it sounded hollow, like they were just trying to say some pablum to meet the moment that had no substance. Should companies be getting in there or not getting in there in these kinds of discussions?
Inevitably, anything that you do today, well, let's start with the fact that in all likelihood, there are people in this world who do not like you. They consist of competitors, ex-employees, potentially ex-spouses. So no matter what you do and where you do it, you will be subject to criticism online. Plain and simple. The bigger you get, the bigger target you are. And that goes both as a company and also as an executive, as a CEO. For those of you who are thought leaders, coaches, those of you who are writing books and doing speeches, it's why honestly I don't do that very much anymore. because this is an environment where even if you've played it straight-laced, that's going to offend somebody. So if you got a thick skin and you're not afraid of that, or you're not bothered by that, and it serves your purpose, then you need to anticipate yourself, kind of do the oppo research on yourself and say, what are all the bad things that people might say about me? And how would I counter that? And be comfortable with that and be authentic about it. I think for companies who have a legitimate something to say about who they are and what they believe, say it, believe it, and be prepared to accept the consequences. Understand what's important to your audience. If it's not important to your audience, then why share it? And I think that's where you have to come to at the center in your communications is why? Why are we sharing this? I think we haven't had a lot of time. One of the things that I like to talk about in regards to being successful in media, and by the way, everybody's on media right now. Everybody, if we were, have the group where we were showing, everybody would be on media right now, and all of the things that you don't do well about media you would be showing everybody else in that case. The main thing that you have to be with marketing and with media is intentional. You need to be able to look at what's going on and decide intentionally. Like, I'm fully aware I got a light switch over to my right. I'm fully aware that I got a little shadow to my left. It is because I'm not in my normal room because my wife was teaching yoga on a particular deck and it would have been noisy to that particular place, and I made a conscious choice. It's not that I was perfect, it was that I made a conscious decision about what was the sacrifices that I could make in that moment that would still provide you an effective way. Completely dealing with the fact that I am fully aware that every time I look over at myself, the way the screen is set up at me, it looks like I'm looking somewhere else instead of looking directly. You have to be that detailed about every piece of communication that you have if you want to control the message. So looking at that level and then making it intentional and making decisions about it, oh my God, there's that decision thing, that is what has to happen. So if you just put out a Black Lives Matter thing because you just want to support it in some way, but you don't really have the support of your company and you don't really understand what it's all about, it's going to come back to bite you most likely. Be intentional about it and be committed to it. Because once you've put it out there, it's out there, so you gotta own it.
Yeah, things last a long time out there.
Forever.
It used to be back in the years of journalism school, they'd say, today you write the newspaper, tomorrow it lines a birdcage, so don't worry about it too much. But not anymore. Your archives electronically last a really, really long time.
Actually,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, many people don't actually know. For all of you who ever watched Mr. Peabody and Sherman as a kid, you'll remember this now. You can actually go to the Wayback Machine and you can go to any website and put in the year that it was there, and you can go pull up that website, including all the things that you've taken off of your website that shouldn't have been there before. That's how accessible everything is. And when you put something out there on a message, it will be there forever. And you should behave that way. You should look at your communications, especially from an internal side, recognizing there's nothing you should be communicating electronically on the inside that you wouldn't be communicating externally on the outside, which was redundant.
Kevin, this has just been so enlightening. I really appreciate your insights here about the mechanics about media, but also how it integrates with the company as a whole. I do want to tell the people that are here on the webinar today that Kevin has agreed to put together a session on media mastery. If you have an interest in getting more information about that, if you could just put something in the chat, please, so that we have an idea.
Yeah, so what we'd be doing, and just explain real quick, what we'll create, what I do regularly is a cohort seminar on storytelling that also addresses the issue of how your media presence is. And I teach the people in that group to critique each other and can usually launch them as a cohort. So I'm willing to do a short version of that for the Gravitas coaches, so you can taste what that's like. That's something that I do with executive teams. So if you just put interested, just the word interested in the chat box, then at least we'll know whether there's enough to do a 10 or 12 person session, and we'll reach out to you along that way. Also, I have a core values test that you can actually test core values with. It's a document, and I'll get that to Julie and Kayla if you're interested. you can get that from them as well. And you can look at a core value and see if it actually holds up to the standard that Jim Collins set out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being forthcoming with this information. I understand that you have some connections with some of the people that are part of the Gravitas Impact community, so I'm sure it's been great for them to get a chance to see you again and hear from you again. All of you, thank you for joining us for our webinar this afternoon. This will be recorded so that you will have access to it later and share it if you would like to do so. You can go to the Gravitas Impact.com website if you'd like to access it that way as well once the recording is finished. Thank you so much and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you for having me.